From the main screen, we have the ramp setup button. This button will allow us to set up cervical or lumbar decompression therapy using various points in which we can determine the amount of force that the patient's neck or low back will receive during the course of their treatment. There are several diagrams depicted showing different formats to be used depending upon what the operator wishes to select. Selecting ramp 1 will enlarge that particular format and will bring up this next screen. On the upper left, we can return to the main screen. Below it, we have a back button. On the upper right, from here, you can select either lumbar therapy or cervical therapy, depending upon what area we're treating. In this screen, by actually touching the segment of the ramp, we can establish a force setting. So for sake of discussion, I would like this to be 50 pounds. I would type in 50 and hit enter. And then at segment 2, I would like this to go to 75 pounds. I would type in 75 and enter. And then for the last bit of the segment, by touching it, I would like this to go to 65 pounds, or 65 pounds, and I would hit enter. During the course of the treatment, over the specified period of time, the unit will go from 50 pounds to 75 pounds, back to 65 pounds at the completion of the treatment. Those numbers are also depicted on the lower part of the screen, showing that SP1 is 50 pounds, SP2 is 75 pounds, and SP3 is 65 pounds. From here, you can also adjust your dwell times for each individual section. Currently, the pull and the dwell time is both set for 5 seconds. For SP1 and SP2, it is set for 2 seconds of pull dwell, 2 seconds of release dwell. Notice that there are no pull and release dwell times next to the third selection, since the third selection is really the completion of the therapy. So there's no point in adding additional dwell time since there's no longer any therapy going on. Below that, you have a force release percentage. Since there'll be variation in the amount of poundage that's being administered to the patient, we can decide by a percentage of the poundage how much we would like it to be reduced during a given segment. So for argument's sake, if I wish to release the poundage for the first segment, which is set at 50 pounds, by 10%, there will be, during the release dwell time, a 5-pound reduction in the amount of pull. In the second section, which is set at 75 pounds, 10% of 75 pounds is 7.5 pounds. Therefore, there will be a 7.5-pound reduction during the release dwell during that section. And for section 3, it would be 6.5 pounds, etc., etc. From here, we will, for the sake of discussion, choose cervical therapy, and you'll be brought to the cervical force therapy screen, which will show you a new series of buttons. Main in the upper left, the back button to take you to the previous screen in the upper right. You do have the ability to actually change your ramp profile in this screen if you so choose. For the purposes of this discussion, we will leave it at ramp 1. You may also change the release percentage during the course of the treatment. In the lower left, we have the time set button, which is now set for 11 minutes. We have the start button. We have our target values and our dwell times in the lower right portion of the screen. Once completed with the cervical force therapy, by hitting the back button, it will take us to the cervical force setup screen, and here, once again, we can go to the session summary screen and save this particular treatment with a unique session number for recall later and if we wish to delete something, we may delete a session from this screen as well. There are some very important aspects to the programming of the antalgia track that you should be aware of. When setting up a patient using force, it should be noted that the antalgia track unit has sophisticated computer programming which will instruct the motors to elongate the stroke in order to achieve the poundage selected by the user. For example, if a patient is set for 10 pounds of pull, which requires 20 millimeters of stroke, and the patient acclimates to the treatment, and now, for the sake of discussion, the antalgia track unit must travel to 30 millimeters of stroke in order to attain the 10 pounds, the unit will do so automatically. Conversely, if a patient displays spasm and needs less stroke in order to reach the poundage, the unit will measure that as well and reduce the stroke accordingly. We recommend that you start your therapy with a patient using stroke, since this way you can work with the patient closely to the tolerance levels that the patient may be displaying at the beginning of their treatment. Since the unit displays, for reference, poundage or stroke, in this case poundage since we're in the stroke mode, it would be wise to note the number of pounds being used on that particular patient during that particular session for future reference, to use it as a baseline in determining initial parameters from switching from stroke to poundage for future treatments. Lastly, since the antalgia track does not use pulleys and rope to effectuate treatment, but rather we use mechanically controlled actuator motors, it has been our experience that less stroke and less force is needed in order to provide an effective treatment. Please make a note of that when you're starting a patient on their care initially.